Welcome to another episode of the Productivity Show. How are you doing today, Brooks?
Excellent. We're recording a little earlier than normal in the morning, so I'm all coffeeed up and ready to go.
I know normally we like to record in the afternoons, late afternoons, but today we had to move some schedule stuff around, and so we're recording right now. As of right now, it is 10 a.m. in the morning. So I don't know how I'm going to do today. If we're going to fall asleep or if we're going to be not as sharp as we normally are. Just kidding. We are just as sharp as we normally are. But I'm looking forward to recording with you here today, and we're going to be talking about planning the perfect week. One topic that I'm super excited about because I like to nerd out about planning and how to do things. And I just got back from Atlanta and I was just talking to my friend Charles about how we plan our weeks and how we are different. So we're going to share some insights of that conversation here today as well. But before we like to kick things off, I want to make sure everybody knows who I am. Hey, this is Tan. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life.
And I'm Brooks, the operations director here at Asian Efficiency, and we are the hosts of the Productivity Show.
So one of the things we always like to do before we get into the content is to share some quick wins with you. So we have some of our favorite resources here today, and I see we have three of them. So Brooks, do you want to go over your top three favorite resources as of lately?
Yeah, so these are three things that we're liking here on either myself, Tan, or the team. So number one is the Uniball Signo DX pen. So this is the pen I happen to be using these days. I don't know if you're particular about your pens, Tan. I would definitely not consider myself a pen nerd, but I do I am pretty specific about what I use. So this one I ordered on Amazon. We have a link in the show notes. I like a really, really fine pen. This one is extremely fine. It's 0.38, but they have different colors and sharpnesses. I use the 0.38 black. The second one is a Pomodoro timer. We're all about the Pomodoro technique here at the Productivity Show. And I think all of us use different timers, but a popular timer is called Marinara. So it's the Marinara Pomodoro timer. It's online and you can tailor things. You can really get focused in. So if you want a Pomodoro timer, you can check out Marinara. And the third is called Magic Plan, and it's an app for iOS and Android. And what it is, it's a room planner. I used it when I was planning out my office, and it turned out everything fit the way I thought it was, which is great. So what you can do is it can actually measure out your office, and then it can also use AR so that you can move things around and kind of see how it would work. So yeah, it was a great app for me, Magic Plan.
We'll have links to all of that in the show notes as well. So if you missed anything, just go to the show notes if you're listening to this on the podcast app. And if you're listening to this somewhere else, let's say Spotify or on the web, just go to theproductivityshow.com/293. All right, Brooks, let's talk about planning your perfect week. Now, I know everybody that's listening here today is really interested in productivity, and they probably have heard of the idea of that planning your perfect week is a good practice to have. But a lot of times people don't know exactly what they need to do or what kind of steps they need to uh, take on. And we want to kind of share some of our best practices that we fine tuned over the years. So if you're somebody who's brand new to productivity, you're going to get a really quick way to plan your ideal week that's coming up. And even if you're listening to this midweek, you can start implementing this right away so you can start having a more productive upcoming week. And if you're somebody who's already studied productivity for a while, but you find yourself not hitting your goals or not getting your tasks done in a timely manner, then some of the tweaks you're going to be learning today will probably help you a ton. So there's something here for everybody. And if you find yourself at the end of every single week, unsatisfied with your to-do list and finding yourself that you're not getting the stuff done that you need to get done, or maybe you're just mismanaging your time, you're going to be discovering some new tips as well that will really help you with that. So, Brooks, one of the things that we always like to do is record in front of the dojo. And as we are recording this now, we have a few members here. And one of the things we start implementing as well for the dojo is do the damn thing, as we like to call it. So DTDT, do the damn thing. And one of the newest features of the dojo is that we allow people to come online with us while we're teaching and actually implement stuff. And we informally call them implementation calls. Would you mind sharing with people what we have coming up and what these calls are all about?
Yeah, so like you said, this is a new thing that we're looking to do in 2020. We're really, really excited about it. We did a test case with some of our Automation Academy customers, and it worked out really well. And basically, the idea is knowledge is great. You definitely want to know about all these productivity techniques, and they can help you out. But really, knowledge is only, I wouldn't even say half the battle. Knowledge is a third of the battle. Knowledge doesn't really help you if you don't implement it. So what we're going to start doing is this new feature called live implementation calls, or the nickname that we came up with our customers is "Do the damn thing." So not just learn about it, but get it done. So we're going to be having a call on this topic, on planning the perfect week, you putting into practice these things that we're going to be talking about in the episode today. We're going to be sitting down with our dojo members and actually planning your week with you. We're going to have it on April 7th. So if you're listening to this before April 7th, you can go to theproductivityshow.com/implement. If you're not already a dojo member, you can just sign up and join in. If you are a dojo member, you'll be getting a notification about that soon if you haven't already. And yeah, we're really looking forward to doing this with you. If you happen to be listening to this after April 7th, no problem. We're going to be doing these regularly on different topics. So just go to theproductivityshow.com/implement and you can register for the next one.
Yeah, and the big idea behind this is that we don't want to give you necessarily more information, because we have a ton of information already on the podcast and also on the blog at asianefficiency.com, right? But one of the things we've noticed is that people need more help actually implementing stuff. So what better way to have some sort of accountability in place while you're showing up live with us, and we're going to walk you through the steps of what you need to do. So if you want to get really good at planning your perfect week and need some help implementing stuff, definitely go check out that live implementation call that we have, as we like to call it, "Do the damn thing." So just go to theproductivityshow.com/implement. Right. So let's get into some of the free content that we have for everybody here when it comes to implementing your perfect week. And we're going to share 4 tips that we have found to be extremely useful and effective and proven to work for planning your perfect week. And again, if you want to start implementing stuff, you can join us April 7th. But here are some of the things that you can implement today if you choose to do so, which we, as you know, like to recommend that you do. So the first tip is to pick a time and day to plan your perfect week. When it comes to planning your perfect week, one of the best things you can do is to actually put it on your calendar and make it a routine, make it a ritual where on a specific day and time, you set aside, let's say, an hour or so to plan your ideal week, right? So the opposite of that would be to say, and something we don't recommend, but sometimes we find people who do this, is to just say, you know what, I'm going to plan my perfect week on a Friday this week. And then the next week you say to yourself, you know what, maybe it seems like maybe Saturday afternoon would be a good time. And then another time maybe, you know, Sunday after brunch or something, right? And if you have this really inconsistent pattern of planning your perfect week, often times you find yourself procrastinating. It's really easy to then delay things. It's really easy to come up with excuses why you can postpone it or not do it at all. Whereas if you make an appointment with yourself or commit to a certain day and time to do it, you find yourself consistently doing it.
Yeah, and this is true for most productivity topics, but it's definitely true for something like planning. If you're waiting to find the time to do it, like to do it when you have time, chances are that time is just never going to present itself. But what happens is if you set the time to do it, put it on your calendar, then usually you're able to work around it. So for myself personally, uh, what I do is I like to do it on Sunday, usually in the mornings. With my family, usually things come up in the afternoon. So Sunday morning, especially since I'm an early riser compared to my family, Sunday morning usually works for me. And that is actually a key, is to try to go somewhere, do it somewhere where you can be not distracted and ideally alone. So for myself, usually I do it down in my office because I just happen to have an office in the basement, and that works for me. Some people need to get out of the house, maybe go over to Starbucks or something like that, and just get away from the regular stuff so that you can be focused and not distracted.
My favorite day is Sunday as well. I usually have it scheduled at 6 p.m. So I can do a Sunday workout in the morning. I can do brunch usually because I'm a big brunch person. I love Eggs Benedict. If you've ever had brunch with me, you know I will order sometimes 2 plates of Eggs Benedict and a side of avocado just because I love it so much. And then also I can then spend the rest of the afternoon kind of like being social if I want to or do something else. But I know as the evening starts, that's usually my perfect time to start planning stuff. So I usually have it on my calendar to work on this at 6 p.m. Now there will be occasions where that might not happen because something comes up or I'm traveling and stuff like that. And so for those one-off occasions, I will then move it to a different day or move it to an earlier time. But usually you'll find myself planning my perfect week on Sunday at 6 o'clock. And it's on my calendar as a repeating event. So I know that I'm focused doing that at that particular time for roughly 45 minutes, sometime up to an hour to do this. And so I even wrote a blog post about this a while back called How I Plan My Week as a CEO. And we'll link to it in the show notes as well. But the big idea here, again, as I mentioned in that blog article, is that you really want to make this a routine. The more routine this is, the more likely you will actually follow through. Because, again, part of it is time, as Brooks mentioned. Sometimes you will come up with excuses to postpone it, and maybe you fill up the time with something else, right? But the other thing I have found is that sometimes we're just not in the mood to do certain things, right? How often have you said to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to work out. And then you went, and then afterwards, you're so glad you did that workout, right? And it's the same idea here. If you leave it up to chance and up to your own willpower to do something, then you might go, you know what, I don't feel like it. I'm too tired. I don't have the energy to do it right now. You'll just procrastinate and not do it, right? And then anytime I have that feeling and I still end up doing my planning, I feel the same way after a workout. I'm so glad I did that because I have so much clarity. I know exactly what I need to do this upcoming week, how much time commitments I have available for stuff. Because some weeks I'm extremely busy. I have a lot of errands, I have a lot of calls, and that affects the amount of thinking time that I have, but also the amount of deep work that I can realistically do. And if I don't have that clarity or insight, then I feel really frustrated because I might say, okay, I need to do all this deep work, but then I have all these calls and errands to run. And I feel really frustrated because I didn't get the deep work done that I kind of like in my head really wanted to do, but it didn't come to fruition because I had other commitments, right? And so having that clarity and confidence knowing that you can do these things comes from being able to plan. And if you have this on a weekly basis, you feel so much more confident about what you're going to do. And it's really motivational as well because you start to see yourself accomplishing your goals a lot faster. And I don't know about you, Brooks. Are you realistic about how you plan stuff, or are you kind of more go with the flow and just fill in pockets of time, or do you kind of schedule stuff?
Yeah, I definitely schedule things. And I'm actually glad you brought that up about that feeling of clarity because for those of you who have read Getting Things Done by David Allen, he talks about this feeling of mind like water. And that is definitely how I feel after I do my planning. You just, like you said, you feel calm, you feel like ready for the week, and you don't feel like frazzled going into the week. And yeah, being realistic is extremely important, especially when you have a family, especially when other people are kind of in your life. So, for example, I need to be really intentional and realistic about when I do my planning. Because if I was to say, oh, I'm going to do my planning Sunday at 4 p.m. or something like that, or I'm going to do my planning Wednesday evening. Well, chances are for me and my family, we're going to be like doing shopping for the week, or because we're West Coast hippies, maybe we'll be going to the recycling station, or like there's a million things that I know is going to pop up with my wife and my kids and that sort of thing. So that's why I know for me, I have to be realistic with when I plan and do it sometime when I know it's not all going to fall apart. So yeah, that's really important for me.
So again, that is tip number one, and that is to pick a time and day to plan for this, right? So let's move on to tip number two here, and that is to schedule your priorities. Now, there's no point in planning your week if you forget what you planned for the week to happen, especially in the middle of the week, right? So if you are planning like us on a Sunday and you don't schedule your big priorities or the things that you really have to do, then chances are if you wake up on a Tuesday morning and you just go with the flow and you just do whatever you feel like doing, chances are you're not going to do the things that actually need to be done, or you're not as intentional about making progress on your goals or the things that really move stuff forward, right? And so if it's out of sight, it's oftentimes out of mind. And so by having it on your calendar, it kind of reminds you of what you need to do. But also when you're planning your week, if you can kind of like be intentional about, on Monday I'm going to do this, on Tuesday I'm going to do that, Wednesday afternoon I'm going to do this, you can kind of create a rhythm and then also kind of visualize how your day and week is going to look like, and then check in with either yourself or with other people about what stuff needs to happen. Because oftentimes you'll start to see, especially if you're working in a team, if they're waiting for you to get certain things done, right, you have to take into account their schedule as well, right? So for example, if you're designing something, you probably need somebody else to create it, but they have their own schedule, right? And if you need to communicate and coordinate with them, let's say they only have time on Thursday to do something, it doesn't make any sense for you to then work on that stuff on a Friday, right? Because then you have another 5-6 day delay. And so by scheduling your priorities, and then also if you can, communicating that to others, is something that we have found to be extremely effective. And so one of the things we've done is when we plan our sprints here at Asian Efficiency, personally, I always like to schedule on my personal calendar some of the things that I'm going to be doing that particular week, but then also put it in we use Jira, so we call them Jira issues. Put it in there as well. So think of them as tasks, essentially. We try to put in there as well, saying, hey, I'm going to work on this on Monday morning. I'm going to work on this on Thursday afternoon. So the rest of the team kind of knows, okay, Tan is going to be working on that, so I can work on other stuff so that I can wait for Tan to then deliver this on, the deliverable date that he mentioned he would get it done by. And so then everyone can kind of coordinate and schedule stuff around that too. Any other tips, Brooks, that you have when it comes to scheduling your priorities?
Yeah, well, there's that example that we've mentioned on the productivity show before. It's kind of like a canonical productivity example. Is this concept of the big rocks and the sand? If you're trying to put if you put a bunch of sand in a jar and then try and fit big rocks in, it won't fit. But if you put the big rocks in first, then the sand will kind of go around it. And with priorities and planning your week, it's the same thing. You get your main priorities, the important things you want to do, get them on your calendar first, and then work the rest of the stuff around it. One thing I find really helpful is to schedule things as early in the week as possible when I'm planning out my week, my important things, that is, because that way, if something does come up, if there's some sort of crisis that comes up, or things don't go the way you think they will, at least you have kind of room to move things forward if you have to. If you're trying to plan things, if you're leaving something late, something big, there's more of a chance that something could happen. This actually happened to me. A counter example, when I didn't follow my own advice. This actually happened to me last week, I think it was. I scheduled reviewing something for Friday afternoon. So when I planned my week, I thought to myself, oh, it's just reviewing. It'll be no big deal. And it turned out to be a big deal. And because it was Friday afternoon, then it just made things a lot more difficult, where if I was smarter about doing that and did it earlier in the week, we would have had more time to kind of work around it. It all worked out fine, but it's something that slipped into the next week when it didn't need to. And that was because I didn't plan it properly as a priority. So yeah, get those priorities down there. If possible, do it earlier in the week. For me, because we do Scrum and we work in sprints. So what I like to do is look at what's at the start when I'm planning my week out. Look at what's left in the sprint that needs to be done, and then I will put them on my calendar, having a general idea when I'm going to work on things. Stuff happens sometimes, but yeah, you try to at least getting those on there will make it more likely that they'll get done.
An important skill as part of scheduling your priorities is kind of obvious, but I just do want to state it out there, is to make sure that you actually use a calendar. Because if you don't use a calendar, it's kind of difficult to plan your ideal week. So if you haven't listened to our episode TPS198, 3 simple steps to help you master your calendar, you can go check out that episode. You can just go to theproductivityshow.com/198. Or if you're listening to this on a podcast app, just scroll down a little bit further to episode 198. Again, 3 simple steps to help you master your calendar. And we have a ton of blog posts as well. We'll link to them in the show notes as well. And also in the dojo, if you're a dojo member and you're listening, we have tons of courses on how to master your calendar as well. And so again, we will have the live implementation call coming up, right? April 7th. Do the damn thing. We'll help you actually implement this. So be sure to register at theproductivityshow.com/implement to be part of that. Right. And a big part of this is that, again, you mentioned the rocks, right? And that's like a classic example that we always talk about on the podcast and on the blog. And I think a different way of looking at it is to say, it helps you avoid distractions. And what I mean with that is, if you know that you're going to be working on something between, let's say, 9 and 10:30, then it's easy to focus on that, but also to say no to other things that might be coming up. Right. So if you already have a commitment to yourself to work on something and something else comes up during that time, let's say it's a meeting or someone wants to grab like an early lunch or a late breakfast, you can then decide how you want to adjust your calendar, because maybe there's an opportunity to have lunch or late breakfast with someone that is really important and meaningful to you. But then by seeing that on your calendar, seeing that you already have something in there, it forces you to then either readjust or reschedule the lunch or dinner or breakfast, or to say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to go for this late breakfast or lunch, but now I have to reschedule this thing I was going to work on another day. And so by having that clarity and knowing exactly what needs to be done at certain days, it gives you a lot more freedom in that sense, right? And so when it comes to being really routine with this, with scheduling your priorities and making sure that you know you're checking your calendar on a regular basis, it actually gives you a lot of freedom in that sense. So a lot of times people get a little bit antsy, especially people who consider themselves to be creatives, by being so structured. They feel like they're being put in a box and that they can't have the freedom to do the things that they do best. But I would actually say the counterpoint is actually more true, where if you are really clear about what you're going to be doing at certain times of the day, it gives you a lot of energy and focus to do that and do your best work. And if stuff has to be moved around, you have the power and knowledge to know that, okay, I'm going to move this to another day and it's still going to get done in the time that needs to be done.
Yeah, just today, actually, on Twitter, I saw a post from a opera singer, and she was actually talking about the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, who was on the productivity show, TPS217. And she was saying, if a creative like her who travels all the time and has a very no fixed schedule at all, if she can do these sorts of things, then anyone can. And I thought that was a great perspective.
So again, that is tip number 2, schedule your priorities. So let's move on to tip number 3 here, and that is to review the previous week. So as you're sitting down and planning your upcoming week, one of the steps that will really impact your planning process is to look back at what happened this past week, because what happened in the past week will give you insight and knowledge of how you are going to tackle the upcoming week. Right. So to give you a really simple example, if you find yourself missing certain tasks or deadlines, what do you need to change or adjust for this upcoming week so that you will hit your deadlines, right? Especially if it's something that's really routine. But also, sometimes you'll get different insights and lessons learned that will help you adjust how you plan. For example, maybe you overestimate how long something takes, and now you can kind of shrink it so that you can have a better estimation of how long something takes for the upcoming week. But the flip side is also true, right? Maybe you're underestimated how long something takes, and now you can readjust for the upcoming week as well. So it's really important to look back at your last week and say, what went well, what didn't go so well, what can I do better this upcoming week? Those are 3 questions I always ask myself. What went well, what didn't go so well, what can I do better? Because if you force yourself to really look back and answer those questions, you'll get a lot of insights. And this honestly, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes or so. And sometimes it's really obvious and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's really subtle. But just those little differences can make a big impact on your upcoming week.
Yeah, and we have a course in the dojo. So if you do want to register for our do the damn thing call, theproductivityshow.com/implement, you can get access to that course as well about how to do a weekly review. And Tan, actually, you shared in the dojo. So this is something else you'll be able to see in the dojo, in our dojo Slack. You shared this great Evernote weekly planning template that you use to plan your week, but also review your week. And I thought that was really, really cool. For me, this is actually something I don't do, but I've realized that this is a productivity hole. I do review my last week. Last month, I go back and look at the previous month and that sort of thing. But now I'm starting to think, and this is making me start to realize that I should kind of accelerate that a little bit and review it weekly as well. So that's a change I'm going to make as a result of this podcast. So that's handy.
Nice. Yeah, I found that to be extremely helpful. So one of the things I have as part of my review process there is to even review my own journal. So I used to do it once a month, just like you did. But I found that if I do it on a weekly basis, I can actually make faster iterations and it doesn't take as much time. And if I do it on a monthly basis, I still do that as well. But then I'm looking for different patterns. I'm looking for like, what was I thinking? What were my decision processes in place and stuff like that? Because it's easier to see what happens over a course of a month. Whereas on a weekly basis, I find that it's really tactical. It's just, what didn't go well, what could I do better, and it's oftentimes little things that that I change and adjust, which really helps. And so going back to the checklist that you mentioned, or the template that I just have like an Evernote template, and I call it Sunday planning, and it takes about 45 minutes, and I literally just have check boxes in there of things I need to check off every single week. So again, I'm answering the 3 questions I mentioned earlier: what went well, what didn't go so well, what can be better. Another step, this is something I recently updated and added, is to review my Aura Ring stats. So if you're not familiar with what an Aura Ring is, it's kind of a ring that you wear around your finger. And think of it as a fitness tracker. So it's kind of like an Apple Watch in a way without the screens, but it's in the form of a ring, and it tracks all these crazy stats, right? So like how much steps you took that day, your heartbeat, heart rate variability, your sleep, like tracks all these different things. But it's really small and obscure, and it's a really cool ring. When you wear it, people would never know that it's a fitness tracker. And so one of the things I've done is added a step in there as part of my planning my week to review those stats, because I want to get better insights of what I can do to improve my sleep. If my Aura Ring is telling me that I'm overtrained or my body's in high stress, then it affects how I'm going to plan my week, because I will probably commit to fewer social events. I will probably be doing less work. I will probably schedule in maybe a massage or something more relaxing, like a walk along the river, because it does a change and affect the way I feel, right? And so we always talk about happy people are productive people. And so but I'm just using this fitness data to kind of make myself quote unquote happier so that I can perform at the best level, right? Because if I go in the week feeling stressed and my body is stressed, then it's just really difficult to accomplish the work and all these amazing things that need to be done. And so the more I can take care of my body, the better I can perform, and reviewing the Aura Ring stats is a big part of that. Right. So again, that's something I do. I also review my journal. I also have a spreadsheet that I update with leading indicators. So I talk about this in the blog post that I mentioned earlier about how I plan my week as a CEO. But some of the things I just keep track of is how much time did I spend thinking? So how much thinking time do I have? How much time did I spend with influencers or people on my top 25 networking list? How much time did I spend on skill acquisition? So that could be learning or actually trying to pick up a new skill. How much time did I spend on deep work and so on? So I have all these different metrics that I just update. And I thought about delegating this to my executive assistant to make it quote unquote easy. But I found that if I do it myself, I become more aware of where my time went this past week. And so by updating it myself and looking back at my own calendar and then updating it, I become acutely aware of like, this is where my time went. I spent 0 minutes on thinking time that probably needs to change this upcoming week. And why didn't I? Then all these other questions come up, right? Like, why didn't I spend time doing thinking time? Why am I not spending enough time doing deep work, right? And you can start to create your own baseline for stuff. So I know this is getting super advanced, but I know some of our listeners are like that. So hopefully you find some of those insights helpful.
Tim Ferriss actually did a podcast a year ago now with Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great and a bunch of different books. And he shared his method for tracking the week and reviewing the week and keeping like up to date with leading indicators. So we'll drop a link into the show notes, theproductivityshow.com/293 with that as well.
So I believe I listened to that episode as well because I remember you posting about it on the forum, and I think he measured how much time he spent on innovation or thinking. It was either one of those, but he measured that if he found himself doing that about 90 minutes a day or so, if I remember correctly, as a kind of like a baseline, and then spread out over a week, that's when things really took off for him. So I kind of took that idea from him, but also from Vern Harnish from Scaling Up. And I've been kind of like implementing this over the last, I want to say, year and a half or so. And I found it to be very helpful just to keep myself in check, right? It's kind of like if you're trying to lose weight and you step on a scale every single day. When you do that and you look at your body weight every single day, you kind of have an idea of what's working, what's not working, what kind of adjustments you need to make, right, in order for that weight number to go down, right? So if you step on the scale and you notice it went up by 2 pounds, you probably think to yourself, okay, what went wrong here? What did I do for the scale to move up? And then it helps you then readjust, right? So it's kind of the same idea. When you update the spreadsheet that I do every single week, it kind of helps me readjust. Okay, obviously this is not looking right. I need to make some changes here. So again, this is super advanced, super detailed. We'll talk more about this in the live implementation call as well. So if you want to be part of that, go to theproductivityshow.com/implement. So again, that is tip number 3, to review your previous week. Now let's move on to tip number 4 here, and that is to leave room for unplanned times. So one of the things that I always have done in the past is that I will pack my calendar with all these things that need to be done, right? Every 30 minutes was scheduled. Everything that I needed to do was put on my calendar. And I find myself not necessarily getting more things done if that actually happens, and I actually didn't procrastinate. But I often find myself extremely stressed as well when everything is just on my calendar and something unexpected happens, and then I have to move stuff around, and I feel just more stressed, and it just creates more work, and it's just it was just a mess, right? And what we have found is that if you leave some room for unplanned times to be spontaneous, to allow for things to happen, for you to have some buffer room or buffer blocks, as we like to call them, you allow yourself to actually be, 1, less stressed, but also 2, to do the little things that need to be done. So as an example, how often have you had lunch with someone and you said, oh, you know what? I need to follow up with that person, right? Or that person mentions this particular book. I need to look that up, right? So instead of doing it on the spot, you want to do it after your lunch. But that takes time, right? Or how often have you had a call with someone and then you wanted to send a follow-up email right away saying, hey, thanks for the call. As I mentioned on the call, I would give you X, Y, and Z. Here it is, right? Instead of waiting another week or creating an additional task for it for then, to happen at some point in the future. And so by having these, what I call like off-ramp blocks, you allow yourself to be, I guess, more present in the moment when you're having lunch or doing something with people, but also to be really mechanical and organized after that to make sure that you follow up and deliver on your promise. So that's some of the things that I would recommend that you do. But also there's just times in the week where stuff comes up and you just can't plan for it. And so if you wanted to be more spontaneous in your life, like I made that decision a few years ago, you just want to allow room in your calendar as well to just allow stuff to happen.
Yeah, because it can be a little demoralizing when you have to move things around. Like I know I said earlier, uh, schedule your important stuff earlier in case you have to move it. And that definitely does happen. And that is one important thing about leaving room for unplanned time so that you do have that flexibility to move things around. But also, for example, in TPS 288, which is an episode we just did recently on the 12-week year, which is a book and a methodology by Brian Moran, they have a good framework for this. They call it buffer blocks. What they recommend that you do is leave 30 to 60 minutes once or twice every single day so that to have all room for all those little things that come up, for those emails you need to send, for calls you need to make, for um, admin stuff that pops up. By having those buffer blocks blocked off on your calendar, you don't have to let them, like you said, you don't have to let them distract the deep work time that you have, because you know you already have time set aside for them, even if you didn't actually know about them ahead of time. Uh, an older podcast we did with Erin Chase, TPS293, she talked about what she does, which I thought was really clever, because if you think about it, anytime you have a meeting, there's usually all of a sudden action items that come out from that, things that you need to do that you didn't need to do when you walked into that meeting. So she said what she does is she adds an extra 30 minutes to the time on her calendar from for the pretty much every meeting. I don't know about every meeting, but most meetings, she just automatically adds that 30 minutes. And then she uses that time when the meeting's over to try and knock off as many action items from the meeting that she had right away while it's fresh, so that it doesn't kind of infect the rest of her week. I guess this is kind of like your concept of the off ramp block. So I thought that was a clever strategy as well.
One of the things that I think is so important, and this is where you have to figure out how to balance this, right? Because earlier we mentioned that it's a good idea to schedule your top priorities, right? And usually we like to recommend to follow the rule of three. So schedule three things to focus on, because once you get more than that, it just becomes more challenging. But also, then how do you balance that idea of like leaving time for spontaneous stuff, right? And so I do think it's valuable to keep blocks of time on your calendar completely free, so that, one, you can go to bed earlier if you want to and catch up on sleep. Or for me, generally, I like to keep my afternoons and nights relatively flexible, because I find that most things that interrupt, quote unquote, my schedule usually happen later in the day. I have the most control about my schedule in the morning, so I like to schedule most of my focus time and deep work and things that need to be done before, let's say, 2 and 3 o'clock. And then after 3 o'clock, it's kind of like a free for all. If someone wants to grab dinner with me and they text me out of nowhere, then I can say yes to that, be there for them and take advantage of certain opportunities. And then also, oftentimes people just want to see or hang out with me, usually later in the day. Um, I'm not a big fan of lunches myself, but sometimes I will have lunch, but I usually have to move stuff around, because I said to myself, basically, you know what, I'm going to use that time to do work and deep work and focus on doing that. And if people want to hang out with me, they can do that later in the day if they want to. And that's a conscious decision I've made. But uh, the bigger idea here is that if you have room for unplanned times, you will see that life is going to be a lot less stressful instead of trying to block off every single minute of your day. So definitely, as you're planning your week, just think about how you can have blocks of open time on your calendar. And you start to see that whether you want to take advantage of that or not, you could do more work if you wanted to, but oftentimes or not, all of us need to actually relax more and do less. So definitely take advantage of that while you're there. So let's summarize today's episode. And that, again, that was tip number 4, leave room for unplanned times. So we shared with you 4 tips today when it comes to planning your perfect week. And remember, it won't be perfect all the time. I think that's a big takeaway that you should have here as well. And there will be instances where you have to readjust, right? It's not a big deal. Don't panic. Don't get all emotional about it. Just stay calm, resolve and address what is coming up, and be okay that things will have to be readjusted every now and then. Now, however, on the flip side, one thing that you should take away from this episode as well is that when you are planning your perfect week, Again, I think the word perfect is, in quotes here. You have to be flexible, but also consistent, right? So by making this really routine, you'll have lots of power and clarity about what you're going to be doing and how you're going to get stuff done as well. And if you do fall off the bandwagon, don't worry, you can always readjust on a weekly basis, right? So if I would recommend any sort of action steps, as always, when you're listening to the Productivity Show and following us at Agent Efficiency, you can expect things to be simple and actionable. And one of the first things I would recommend that you do is to choose a day and time of the week to do your first planning session and to put it on your calendar. Okay, so if you haven't done so yet, please do that right now. And if you are somebody who already is planning on a regular basis at a specific day and time, one of the things I would then recommend is to look back what you did over the last week or so and just review your last week. What went well? What didn't go so well? What could you do better this upcoming week, right? And again, we'll have links to all of this stuff that we talked about today in the show notes. Just go to theproductivityshow.com/293. And if you're listening to this on the podcast app, just go check it out in your app here today.